It's generally agreed that movies, and pretty much any other kind of story, either falls into the good category or the bad category. Now, there are of course exceptions to this, as with anything else, where you sometimes have such things as so bad it's good, or good movies with a bad scene or bad elements to them, stuff that's just plain average, and other things of that nature. But there are also rare occasions where movies aren't written to be good, and yet manage to feel as if they're geniusly made in spite of that. Which is to say, the movie is by all appearances bad. It's not well written, it looks low budget, but there's just something about it that keeps the viewer captivated due to some inarticulable brilliance. Now, there were a few movie directors who were famous for evoking this, such as legendary B director Roger Corman, because even though most of his scripts weren't written as well as they could have been, not by a long shot, and his penchant for making films cheaply was often apparent, his talents as a filmmaker were still incredibly obvious in spite of that, and made his films more watchable than they otherwise would have been. But honestly, if there was one director who managed to mix terrible and brilliant in the most bizarre ways possible, it would have to be Russ Meyer. And just for those of you who don't know, Russ Meyer was a film director who took a different approach when it came to getting his message across to the audience, which is that he directed a lot of his movies like glorified, adult films, which he would then sneak his own commentary into between the R-rated stuff. But what made his movies different from similarly styled films of his day was that he was a genuinely good filmmaker who could have made conventionally good movies if he wanted to, but he actively chose to embrace, shall we say, the more primal desires of the audience instead. Especially for those who like women's chests, as his extreme love for them is very well known. But the point is, Russ Meyer was a brilliant director and writer, which is something that most film experts, which granted I most definitely am not, are in unanimous agreement on. Even famed critic Roger Ebert collaborated with Meyer a few times, with most of the few scripts he wrote actually being brought to the screen by Meyer. But that being said, if one were to watch most of his movies, they probably wouldn't get this vibe at first glance. Because once again, his movies could easily come across as just another dime a dozen glorified adult film that only has a plot to pretend it's trying to say something. But the difference here is that Meyer really did have something to say, and to put it as gently as possible, the way his movies alternate between mindless, primal urges and sophisticated commentary and satire is really something that must be seen to be believed. For example, one of his movies centers around a nymphomaniac, but sprinkled in is Meyer's commentary on racism and the Vietnam War, which eventually comes to the forefront at the movie's climax. And again, considering how it's all written, you'd think you were watching two completely different movies depending on the scene. Now, of course, there is the question of why Russ Meyer decided to take such an approach to making his films, as based off the ones he did make, they clearly could have been so much better if he had toned down the, seduction and aftermath, let's say. To put it another way, his talent and potential are extremely obvious, so why did he opt to write movies knowing they would be bad? Well, he said the reason that he took that approach was because he was looking for a universal way to appeal to the audience so that they would actually listen to what he was trying to say, and figured there was nothing more universal than, shall we say, the ultimate mating of two individuals. And considering he was at his height when the Hays Code, which strictly forbade depicting such things for the entire golden age of Hollywood, fell apart and was replaced with the new rating system, it was a pretty novel idea for his time to be so blatant while using that to make his point. But at the same time, does this approach actually work? Did he get people to listen to what he really wanted to say better than most other filmmakers because of his unorthodox approach? Well, critics certainly seem to think so, considering most of them were met with extreme acclaim despite the subject matter, as well as actually directing a few movies written by Roger Ebert himself. Seriously, if that doesn't prove his talents as a filmmaker, then nothing will. But as far as the audience goes, I would have to say it's much more of a mixed bag. Because naturally, there are those who hate any kind of depiction of what he used so much of in his movies, and thus alienated those people on principle. And, of course, some would also argue that most women wouldn't exactly love the idea of sitting through a movie where they're constantly staring at other women's huge chests. But to be fair, Meyer was often felt to write good female characters and didn't treat them as glorified lust objects. But either way, that could still be a turnoff for many women, and even some men. But there is another, more in-depth reason why Meyer's logic was more flawed than it might seem at first. Which is that his two goals with any given movie are at odds with each other. Because on the one hand, he wants to appeal to the primal desires of the audience because it's universal, while on the other, he wants to use the movie to give his commentary on something, and usually in a pretty smart way at that. And listen, maybe that appeals to some people, maybe even a lot of people, I don't know. But what this basically amounts to is that you've got the lowest form of art interacting with a pretty high form of art all at once. And as a result, the people who are watching the movie to satisfy their primal urges will resent his commentary and the better made parts because it's taking time away from that, while the people coming for his commentary might not be too pleased at how low it gets in places. My point is, it seems that the people who'd want to listen to him would come to his movies anyway, and that the people he's attracted by using his unorthodox approach were never going to be interested in what he's saying anyway. Now once again, I could be wrong. Maybe Meyer did grab the attention of a lot of people he otherwise wouldn't have by doing what he did, but I personally think the whole idea was a bit flawed, especially if one knows how people get when it comes to satisfying their primal needs. Even more so considering he made his movies in the days before the internet. And not to mention, plenty of great directors managed to get the audience to go and listen to what they had to say on something, and often by using far less seemingly universal methods at that. As I said, one can't help but think that maybe he shouldn't have been concentrating so hard on that. But again, it's hard to say. And to be fair, it probably seemed like a better idea at the time, considering nobody had ever been able to do anything like that before. But either way, the point is that Russ Meyer's extremely unorthodox approach to his movies, regardless of the reason or its effectiveness, has most definitely cemented his status as one of the most unusual, but bizarrely brilliant, directors in film history. Okay, I think that's everything I wanted to cover. So now I'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you believe that Russ Meyer was a genius and that it's well reflected in his movies? Or do you think he would have been better off making more conventional films? Please let me know in the comments below. And please remember, like I always say, you do not have to agree with this video if you don't want to. You can feel about absolutely any topic I cover here that you want to, and I nor anybody else can tell you you're wrong. And sorry if I kept being so vague, nondescript, and using a lot of metaphors in certain places, but I was just trying to find a way to get some of the subject matter discussed here across without getting this video blocked. And thank you all very much for watching. I really appreciate it. And I hope to see you all next time.